I'm joined this morning by Chris King from Siemens. Chris, firstly, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
We were talking a little bit off air about, one of the primary themes that Siemens is discussing at this event. It's about transactive grid. What do you mean by that? I mean, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure, and it's not our idea. Actually, this got a lot of attention going back to the beginning of the year in New York, where the Commission has launched a proceeding. And what they have said is they would like to see a lot more activity around distributed energy resources and about involving customers and empowering customers in the market. So they started this proceeding they called Distributed System and Services Platform for reforming the energy vision. And the idea is that the distribution utility probably, provides a platform, a technology that can support these activities. And they're transactive because they go both ways, power flows both ways. And many of the activities on this system are created or incentivized by financial incentives. So you get a price signal coming from the wholesale market, or it could come from the distributor, turn on your power, turn off your storage, or whatever it is. So that's where you get the transactive piece.
And from a technology point of view, because I could imagine that there are a whole bunch of challenges with something like that. So
Sure.
Let's try and break them down and compartmentalize them somewhat. From a technology point of view, I mean, what are some of the sort of challenges and hurdles to building a platform like that? Or are you saying that actually the tech is already there and it's primarily on a regulatory side?
The technology is pretty much there. So there are a couple of challenges. One is defining what is the scope of this. So it includes a lot of things that we've all been talking about: demand response management systems, virtual power plants, microgrids, and so on the technical side. But how do you bring those together? Who does that? Like I said, is the distribution utility. And then there's some thorny regulatory issues. So the first one, fairly straightforward, is how do you provide cost recovery for that and the right financial incentives? So utilities make money by doing this, by facilitating this marketplace. And then another one is, can they participate? How can they participate? Are they allowed to have on-site storage? Are they allowed to put rooftop solar and own rooftop solar on customer sites? And those sorts of things.
And from that point of view, I mean, so this is effectively like an energy trading platform. Could we say that? Is that what it is, or is it a bit deeper than that?
It's an energy trading platform.
Yeah.
And if you think about it today, we have that at the transmission level in all the markets. And what this is saying is, well, that needs to go down the next level, because now we're having energy coming in, we're having customers becoming generators and so on. So we need to take it down to that next level. And the distribution companies are actually having to help the transmission companies by balancing within the distribution grid and then handing that up to the transmission.
So does this then need it to go all the way down to the consumer, where we end up with dynamic pricing to the consumer? Because otherwise I could imagine this thing doesn't work, because you need it to be agile all the way down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a vision, right? So in this proceeding, the first step was to define what are the functions. And the list has about 50 different functions. Some are on the grid side, some are on the consumer side, some are on the market side. And ultimately you get these layers. You get transmission, the distribution, and then the customer itself becomes a microgrid, as you were just saying. And in fact, we're doing this today in a pilot project with Salzburg AG in Austria, of all places, Sound of Music, etc. But there are a number of buildings involved, and they each have what we call a building energy agent. And the agent takes in price signals. It takes in information about the building, what's going on in the building, and then it turns loads on and off, or generation on and off, in response.
So that is in real time making the building react to what the requirement is.
Yes.
And that's in a commercial building, or is that all? down to like a household as well?
It's one of them is a group of flats, an
Right.
apartment building, and another one is a commercial building.
Because the reason why I'm sort of going into that point is because we did an interview yesterday, and there's an argument which sounds very similar to what's happening in New York and so on, where actually the way the energy market works in Europe is fundamentally flawed because you don't have this ability to have dynamic pricing, which is almost creating sort of false and inflated prices because people are having to buy ahead and then add risk to it because they don't know what's going on.
Right.
But this dynamic model would kind of help counterbalance that somewhat, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, in Europe, you have both. You have markets, there are 27 member states. Some are not effective, but then you have others. I was talking to a company in Finland yesterday, and they do this at the individual house level. They bring in the wholesale prices from the market, and then they have a controller within the home, and it turns on, in this case, it's a CHP, turn that on or off in response to those signals. Because you can easily turn off the heat for 2 hours with really no change in the premise, and then you've taken advantage of low-cost wind energy, and then when you turn it back on, or turn it off later when the high cost comes in.
And so if we dive into the whole regulatory side, what, I mean, it always seems fascinating to me because what seems to be happening in New York just makes so much sense, but you still have sort of regulatory frameworks that don't seem to be reacting at the right speed or in the right way to what's happening with the whole energy paradigm, which is completely shifting with renewables.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. The good news, though, is it's recognized. So in New York, the commission has said we recognize that normally a utility makes more money by investing in copper and substations and so on, and building the rate base. And we need to do something because times are changing. So that's phase 2 of the proceeding, and all this is supposed to be decided early next year. And I just heard yesterday at the European Commission level, this has come up, and the staff has sort of seen this as well and has said, well, this is something important, we need to look at it. So that's not a solution yet, but at least the problem is being recognized.
At least it's being recognized and people moving on. The other thing I was going to ask is that, okay, putting together an energy trading platform like this is no small challenge from tech point of view and everything. So how do you pay for it? I mean, and who owns it? You know, is this something where in New York it would be owned by New Yorkers effectively, or does the distribution service company own it? I mean, and you know,
I think it ends up like the transmission system today, which is owned ultimately by customers through governments. In New York, that was a specific question. Do the utilities own this or do third parties? The first staff paper, the conclusion was that at least initially it needs to be owned by distribution utilities. Over time, what I believe we'll see is those distribution utilities that step up to the plate, that provide this capability, will get support from their regulators. They'll get cost recovery. It'll be in the rates, which are charged to everybody. And then others who either are unable or unwilling to do so, at some point the regulators are going to push for perhaps a market entry by others. I chaired a panel yesterday where one of the conclusions was, well, the telcos are probably going to have a major role in this future. I'm not ready to jump to that conclusion yet, but certainly there are others waiting in the wings to step in as needed.
and if we imagine for a second that, you know, and I don't think this is a stretch, that, you know, these sort of transactive platforms are going to creep up more and more everywhere. How do you think that is going to change and enable some of the other talk that's been happening through this conference, for example, about the sort of changing business models for the utility and and when I say utility, right, we got to couch that into, are you a distribution company?
Right.
Are you an energy retail? I mean, is this one of the key elements to enabling that business model change as well?
I would say yes, in the sense that it's really necessary to enable those functions and therefore the business models. On that functionality front, I mentioned earlier, you can look in this proceeding, there's 50 functions or so, and of course not all of them are coming day one. So how do we get there? We're already moving in that direction. Utility implements DRMS, that's a first step. Implement VPP software, that's a first step. Bringing those together is a major step in some sort of integrated way, then bringing in pricing. And then on the business model, we're seeing some exploration, some discussion. I was speaking to a commissioner in California a couple of weeks ago, and what she said was, the jury's out on this. We're not sure whether utilities should be able to do some of these things or not. From her perspective, it sort of comes back to what I said earlier, which is if the market is providing this and stepping in and able to do this, both from a functional and a business model standpoint, then maybe the utilities don't need to be in there. But if it's not, then maybe the utilities should be, and they certainly have some advantages.
And if we can explore that a little bit, because as we're coming to the end of our time here, because there has always been this perennial question about, do we allow distribution companies to own storage, or is that really a pseudo generation thing? So do they need a generation license and so on? Where would you, on a personal level, sit with all of that? I mean, because I seem to think it makes sense for the distribution grid to have kind of storage at the core of it, rather than waiting for someone to provide it.
I agree, and my test would be, is there a direct benefit to the distribution grid? If it's completely independent of the grid, selling newspapers, there's not the connection. But if it helps support the reliability of the grid or the efficiency, the ability to avoid expenditure by having storage locally and so on, then I fully agree that that's something the distribution utility should be able to do.
Because it seems to me that, with more and more intermittent power on the grid, and the analogy I always draw is like, casting my mind back to my IT days, where security used to be something you did on your machine, and then Cisco kind of came up with the idea, well, actually it shouldn't be on your machine, it should be, the network should have security by default, and it seems to me that is a very similar analogy to our fit-for-purpose distribution and transmission grid. If we can have this intermittency, then the network needs to be capable by default to be able to handle it.
And maintain reliability and take advantage of the scale economies and the ability for utilities to have low-cost financing and those sorts of things.
Yeah, because I can't understand the reason to, just do it independently of that. It just seems counterintuitive to have a, whacking great big battery farm, which has got yet another business model to contend with, rather than just making it part of the system.
And frankly, there's a social element to this. I mean, I think as a society we agree people have basic needs. Electricity is one of them. That doesn't mean we give it for free, but we socialize the cost of the network. So the farmer who's 2 kilometers beyond the last substation pays the same for the grid as somebody in an apartment building where 50 apartments are connected.
And just to create a link to something that we did together on Engerati, which is a webinar on energy storage. There's a question that's been creeping up since then, and I just want to ask, and it's about the cost of energy storage, and in this case particularly around batteries and things like that. At what point do you think we'll have a tipping point where we truly see sort of distributed storage? You and I could actually have energy storage in our house so that it could theoretically be independent for 4 hours or 5 hours at an economical rate, not at, at a disproportionate cost?
It's a fascinating question. Had lunch in San Francisco in September with former Energy Secretary Chu, and he was telling me that the cost of storage has come down from $1,000 to $600 a kilowatt hour and expected to go to $200 in the next 4 years. So it's dropping very fast, and B, he thinks that's the tipping point, about $200 a kilowatt hour, $10,000. You could put solar panels on your house, put storage, and effectively get off the grid. Not that that's necessarily what you want to do, but it creates a huge dynamic in the marketplace for change.
And to follow on from that, I was at an event recently where there were a lot of solar panels, and one of the trends that I found fascinating is that the solar panel manufacturers, some of them anyway, actually had batteries as an integrated part of those panels, and that's just going to drive it right back down as well, isn't it?
Yes, and the business model, Solar City, is starting to do that with businesses because the economics are a lot better.
Well, Chris, I think we've come to the end of our time here, and thank you for watching this, the first of many interviews on day 2 at European Utility Week. And Chris, thank you for taking the time to join us this morning.
Thanks for having me.